Yes, friends, in the previous segment, we had started rather talking about new Marxism. And we said that there are thinkers in this category who derive their ideas from Marx, but they say that these are those ideas which have been rather ignored by successive Marxist scholars. And these ideas are very important in the sense that they have a lot of utility for the present, for the understanding of the present times. And therefore, they ask us to revisit Marx. And therefore, here they have come up with their own explanations in keeping with the original ideas of Karl Marx. We today would discuss two prominent thinkers in this category. One prominent thinker is Bill Warren. He is a strong critic of dependency theory and world systems theory. He argues that Marx basically did not give a one-sided critique of capitalism. Rather, he was conscious of its great dynamism. So, what he is trying to say here that usually what we understand is that Marx was a great critic of capitalism and all the problems which the world has are because of capitalism, and capitalism has created a system whereby the bourgeois are exploiting the proletariat and they are getting richer and richer, whereas it is leading to the great immiseration of the poor people in the world. And therefore, capitalism is something which should have been better avoided, as far as the growth of human history is concerned. But here, Bill Warren argues that Marx actually considered capitalism as an essential stage of human development. He argues that Marx regarded the introduction of capitalism in backward societies by the colonial powers as a positive development. So, although colonialism per se was something bad as per the understanding of Marx, but Marx, according to Bill Warren, regarded that in the in these backward colonies, when capitalism was introduced, it drove out the backward modes of production in these societies. And it unleashed a lot of productive capacities where new modes of production came into existence. And therefore, those societies registered a very fast growth. The pace of growth which these societies registered, according to Bill Warren, was much faster than the kind of growth which was registered in the European countries when they started with capitalist growth. So therefore, he argues that although it is very painful, but if you want to create a socialist order in any society or at the global level, the path lies only through capitalism. And therefore, we need to endure capitalism here. So this capitalist growth, which was very essential for these societies, that is the backward countries of the world which were colonized by the European powers, the kind of capitalist growth which these societies saw was something very positive according to Bill Warren. And he says that Marx would have definitely appreciated this kind of capitalist growth because that was very essential for these societies to go to the next stage of development and rather reach to the stage of socialism in their historic growth. He argues that Lenin was both empirically and theoretically wrong when he argued that capitalism was not able to build the productive base in the third world, as Marx had prophesied. So, he says that the way Lenin looks at these societies, and the role of capitalism in these societies is something which is wrong, because Lenin was probably not able to appreciate properly the kind of contribution which capitalism had made in building up the productive bases in these rather backward countries of the world. Warren argued that capitalism was fulfilling its historic role in the poor countries of the South by developing the means of production. So the means of production, as I mentioned earlier also, as they developed in these societies, would not have developed and would not have developed so fast, but for the introduction of capitalism or the tentacles of capitalism in these societies through the imperialist forces, which came and colonized these parts of the world. And he further argued that it was important for the future transition to socialism by developing an urban working class, because capitalism in these societies was able to develop a very huge mass or a huge base of urban working class. So therefore, according to him, imperialism was the pioneer of capitalism. So imperialism pioneered capitalism, and it was not its highest stage, as was argued by Lenin. So therefore, Warren is at variance with Lenin when he tries to understand the international role of capitalism and how capitalism has played a very positive role in creating a favorable ground in these societies for their transformation from capitalism to socialism. He further gave examples of how capitalism had led to development in these poor countries by creating better health facilities, because these societies registered a lot of rather positive things. Growth was registered in these societies by the creation of better health facilities, better facilities for education, infrastructure in terms of education by the creation of schools, colleges, and sometimes even universities, and greater access to consumer goods. So these are the things which were developed in these colonies by the colonial powers, and this was something which was very important as far as taking these societies forward on the path where they could easily transition to socialism. This, according to Warren, had contributed in these societies to the long-term development of productive forces. So the productive forces which developed in these societies, they were a consequence of these initiatives, which were taken by the colonial powers. Of course, he is not absolving the colonial powers of any, wrongdoing, because obviously one can understand that whatever was happening in these countries and whatever growth, so to say, was taking place in these countries at the behest of the colonial powers, they were basically being done in the interest of the colonial power. The colonial power did not actually have any interest in the growth and development of these colonies, but once they were there, they had to rule these countries, they have to continue to be there and to exploit their resources. So they created these facilities in those places, basically for their own ends. So it was not basically intended at rather the development of productive forces in these countries so that these countries could move forward. But anyway, whatever might have been the intentions of the capitalist powers, who were controlling these colonies, they eventually contributed in the growth and development of productive forces in these countries. Warren further argues that in the period, that is in the first half of the 20th century, when colonialism slowly and gradually came to an end, there has been a rapid increase in the production of wealth in the third world. So the third world countries have registered a remarkable growth, which would not have been possible if these countries of the third world were not touched by those colonial powers who went and colonized these countries and ruled over them and unleashed those productive forces unwittingly in those countries or those parts of the world. Although this kind of production of wealth, Warren agrees or concedes, has not been uniform, but this is like the growth rates in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. So the kind of growth rates which were registered in the European countries in the 18th, 19th century, the almost similar kinds of growth rates were registered in these societies post colonialism, in the post-colonial period, immediately after the demise of colonialism in these countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Warren disagrees with the explanation which is the common explanation, that the development in these third world countries has led to the development of underdevelopment here. As has been argued by many scholars of the Marxian school or Marxian strand, who have been generally very critical of the development which took place in these third world countries, and especially the world system theorists who have called this underdevelopment. So here Warren argues that we should not be very critical of these developments, as they have led to the fulfillment of capitalism's historic mission as the forerunner to socialism. These are very important words, because here Warren is trying to tell us that this is actually a very important role, which capitalism has played in these countries, and this has actually prepared a ground for socialism in these countries of the world. Of course, one might disagree with Warren on the basis of what one sees in the world today in the form of growth of capitalism in the world and the consequent poverty which has afflicted countries of the periphery. Obviously, if we were to look at the world today against the backdrop of what has been argued by Warren, we would find that Warren's explanation is not very consistent with the realities of the world today, because we see that how with the growth of capitalism in the present world, the rich countries are getting richer and richer every day, and the poor countries are getting poorer and poorer every day. And all the wealth is being concentrated in the rich countries for obvious reasons, which we have already discussed in the previous segments. So therefore, one would disagree with Warren if one were to look at what he has explained or what he is talking about as far as the present world is concerned. So theoretically, there might be some logic to what Warren has, to the explanation as to what Warren has argued, but when we look at the reality of international politics, we find that that is not very consistent with the actual growth of capitalism in the present world. Another prominent scholar in the field of, in this category of neo Marxism is Justin Rosenberg. Justin argues that we need to engage with explanations of Karl Marx directly. He focuses on the character of the international system, and he is critical of an historical account of international system as given by realists. And he says that we need to give a historical account of our IR, because he says that nothing is permanent or no explanation is permanent across time. Like the realists have made us believe that this is the nature of international system, this is the structure of international system, the inevitability of conflict, and we all being, self-help actors in the international system, and we have to survive, and this is something which is true to all times and all situations. So here Justin says that IR was different in different times. For example, during the time of the Greeks, the international relations was different from what it was during the Italian times. And if we see or find any resemblance in these two periods or any two periods in human history, that resemblance is actually an optical illusion. So scholars who try to explain these systems in an ahistorical manner, they are trying to create an optical illusion, and we all fall for that optical illusions. And therefore he says that all these systems in the past and even today are fundamentally different. For example, in the Greek times and the Italian times, there were different set of social relations, and so are there even today. So every period of human history has a different set of social relations, and And the nature of social relations conditions, the kind of system we would have at that given period of time. He argues that the modes of production in different periods are obviously different, and therefore the features of interstate relations are also different. Social relations, therefore, are the key to understand the nature of IR or international relations in a particular historic period. So, therefore, when we are talking of any particular historic period, one thing which we need to understand according to Justin Rosenberg is that that historic period is unique, and we need to look at its mode of production. And therefore, consequently, we also need to look at the kind of relations which states have with other states at that particular period of time. And all this is undergirded or underlined by the nature of social relations which exist at that particular period of history. When Justin looks at the present times or the present international relations, he argues that this period is also unique because for the first time in human history, a state is not directly involved in production under this present system of capitalism. Because in all earlier periods of history, a state always had a direct involvement in controlling and regulating the forces of production. But under capitalism, the role of the state is only political. Because capitalist enterprises operate quite freely in the international system, because that is what capitalism requires. That the market forces should be left free and there should be no national or international organization or authority or any structure which regulates the operation of the market, and the market would regulate itself. And there is an invisible hand which will regulate the market. So that is the logic on which capitalism is based, and therefore capitalist enterprises in the present world operate freely. And this is something which is unique to the present international system. So to prove his point further, here Justin Rosenberg is trying to explain to us that the present period in which we live, which is characterized by the dominant role of capitalism in the global economic system, is so very unique, and it is different from earlier periods of human history. So therefore, to treat all periods of human growth and history as one is something which is wrong. And if our assumptions are wrong, they are bound to take us to wrong conclusions. So therefore, he asks us, that is scholars or students of international relations, to look at all periods of human history separately. They are all sui generis cases, unique to themselves, unique to that period of human history. He further argues that anarchy is a feature of the capitalist system. So apparently, the system is in order. Everything is working in an orderly fashion at the national or at the international level. But he says that there is an underlying anarchy because all wage earners and capitalists are in a constant state of competition. So there is a constant competition between wage earners and capitalists, because wage earners are getting a pittance and they are constantly in competition with the capitalists to get more and more, whereas on the other hand, the capitalists are not willing to concede any further. And that is what the competition is. The competition might be not very visible, on the surface, but under the surface, it's very, very apparent that a competition is constantly on between the wage earners on the one side and capitalists on the other. Justin adds that anarchy is the condition of capitalist relations, and not only a set of conditions limited to international relations. So it is not something which is limited to the international system, as the neorealists would want us to believe that the international system or the structure of the international system is anarchic. He says that anarchy is more pervasive, and all capitalist relations are conditioned by anarchy. and therefore it is inherent in the social relations within the capitalist mode of production. And therefore, it is not only a trans-historical feature of relations between states. So, between states, there is anarchy, and one may argue that there is anarchy, and relations of countries with each other are conditioned by this issue of anarchy. But it is much deeper, according to Justin Rosenberg, where he says that it is inherent in the social relations within this mode of production characterized by capitalism. So therefore, both these scholars of new Marxism, that is Bill Warren and Justin Rosenberg, argue that we need to return to Marx, because when we return to Marx, his ideas give us useful insights which can help us to understand the international system better. So rather than arguing that the ideas of Marx are not very relevant to understanding the present international system, as many other scholars within the category of Marxism have argued, here they are saying that Marx continues to be extremely relevant and salient even for understanding the present times. The only thing which we need to do is to use the right theoretical tools, pick them up from the writings of Marx, and then try to understand the international system in the light of those tools and explanations which were given by Karl Marx. Generally, all these strands of thoughts within Marxism, if we were to look at them holistically, they are quite unconvinced in the present times upon the emphasis which is today placed on globalization. Because in the present times, there is so much of emphasis on globalization which has emerged as a global common sense today. And there is this overpowering, dominating presence of globalization which is informing every understanding of international politics today. So this overemphasis on globalization and this inevitability of globalization and the utility of globalization and nothing else in understanding the present international system is something which alarms all Marxists across all these four strands. It actually is a point, according to them, in the long-term growth of capitalism. Their argument basically is that as capitalism grows, we reach to different, periods in the growth of capitalism, and this is one point, to which capitalism has grown today. And therefore, we need to rid ourselves about the notion that this present order is something which is unavoidable, which all countries and people of the world need to embrace, and there is no option but globalization for all of us. And they call all of us scholars and theorists in the field of IR and students to understand that what is required today is to lay the groundwork for change. And what we need to do is, and what is required in the world, is to change this international system, this exploitative, unjust, inequitable international system, into a more just and compassionate international order. So that is basically the point of optimism with which the Marxist scholars in the field of IR leave us. And that is something, which is very important for us, because they have been able to provide us a different set of theoretical tools to understand international relations. Because as the other theories which we have already discussed, all those theories of realism and neorealism and liberalism and neoliberalism, they all, and several others like them, they are all emanating from the West, from the Western countries. Now this Marxian framework is something which comes as an alternative frame of thought. It is an alternative viewpoint. It is an alternative framework. Obviously, many thinkers are still located in the West who are Marxian scholars of different strands, as we have seen. but they have presented us with a different kind of a window to look at international politics. And therefore, they have enriched or they have contributed to enriching our understanding of international politics. And there lies the utility of this approach to international politics. In the next section, we will talk about some other important approaches to understanding international relations like feminism and constructivism. Thank you.